beautiful Kristen here, and we are so glad to have her here with us. Rachel, Trost, come on up. Now, I need to, let's just make sure you can hear her. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3.
It's the yellow one, Amanda. Is she muted? Okay.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Awesome. Good. Hey, take it away. Okay. Wow, now I'm loud. Okay. So, this is right up here. Nice to that. I just have a lot of respect and admiration for MOPS and what it does for moms and families, and I just really appreciate you guys people asking me to come and just this organization in general. My first memory of MOPS is actually from when I was at church as a little girl, and MOPS was being mentioned a lot, and I was like, after several weeks of hearing about this group of women that was getting together of moms, I was like, Mom, now can you explain to me why all these women are getting together to talk about like cleaning products and MOPS? I just don't really get it. So she's like, great. But I also have had 2 friends in really the last year that have shared with me their testimony just about how MOPS has been the only lifeline for them, and just a really hard, trying time of mothering for both of them, and I just really appreciate this organization. So like Nancy mentioned, I'm going to be talking a bit about development and my own testimony. But even though I'm talking about development, which I know can be kind of a scary topic for moms, as we want everything to be great and everything to be perfect and check all those boxes, I hope today is a blessing for you too. So before I get started, I do want to share a bit about myself. I love myself. That's a bit blurry, I guess, but these are our Christmas photos from our Christmas card this year. So that's my husband, Brian. He actually is on staff with Young Life, which I know that you guys do a lot with Young Lives, which is the Teen Mom component of Young Life. In general, Young Life is an organization that reaches out to adolescents. It's a ministry that reaches to adolescents, so I really appreciate all the work you guys do with Young Lives, and Monica, it's a blessing to us. And then I have these 5-year-old twin boys, Asher and Zach. They are in kindergarten in Novi, and then I have my 20-month-old daughter, Chloe. So I know this is a lovely picture. Please remember me this way, because this is what was actually happening during the whole photo shoot. So my dear friend who took these pictures for us was able to capture a few things that actually looked appropriate, but mostly it was this going on. Chloe's face is hilarious, but the boys in the background just get me every time I see this picture. They're just like, seriously, Mom, we're doing this now, I know you've been there. You've tried to get nice pictures of your family too. Okay, so that's me personally. Professionally, I am a pediatric occupational therapist, and I've been in so many small talk settings, especially with my husband's ministry, where people are like, oh, you're a pediatric occupational therapist. What? Great. I have no idea what that means, and why would a child need help with their occupation or their career? That doesn't really go together. So that's the long definition. Basically what I define it as is, when I'm in those small talk settings, is helping people with what occupies their time. So if for kids, that looks different than like a geriatric or an aging population, or sometimes we work with people with spinal cord injury or traumatic brain injury. And we work in all different settings. Schools, early on, which is Michigan 0 to 3 program that comes into your home. We work in inpatient mental health, outpatient mental health. We have a variety of places where you might run into an occupational therapist. But with children and pediatrics, we do a lot with development. So we work on gross motor skills, which are the big, running, jumping, skipping, fine motor skills, more of the hand skills. Sometimes we do social, emotional things, building of that. So that is just a brief overview of what pediatric occupational therapist is. So now next time you're in a small talk setting and you hear someone say that they're a pediatric OT, you don't have to give the glazed over look that I always get. Okay, so that's occupational therapy. I do think it's really important to just share my testimony and where I came from as I'm here before you, but as a mother, really. So that picture is taken a few hours after Asher and Zach were born. And I was a lot like that couple in the video. My husband had worked very closely with families for over a decade in ministry, and I had been working professionally closely with families. So I just really thought I had a great grasp on how I was going to be as a parent and what I was going to do, things I'd see that I didn't think I should do. And I just thought it was going to be, I don't know, you just like love the babies and then everything's fine, right? But, the minute they were born, truly, something inside of me broke. And I just became honestly terrified. I had all these fears. And it's crazy the things you remember. I had this lactation consultant that told me that my littler twin, Zach, should be eating more because he was the smaller one. And of course he didn't do that, so then I thought that's a reflection on me. Crazy things that you just take upon yourself as if you should be able to completely control these kids that you have created. And it just began this process in me of just complete terror and fear. And actually what ended up happening is that I realized I had postpartum depression and anxiety, so I had to get that treated. And beyond that, I even had a large faith crisis, I would say, where I just wasn't sure if I really could trust that God was still good, because this was such a hard time for us. We had, both the boys weren't developing exactly appropriately, and as a OT, I knew that was happening, and I thought that was a reflection on me, and I'm taking a lot of concern about how they were developing onto myself. So that faith crisis was eventually resolved as I just realized over time that the only way to kind of get through this mothering and this fear that I had was to trust God with all my problems. And even today, things still aren't going exactly as I would have pictured. Today, Asher, my one son, he keeps failing hearing tests, so we have a audiology appointment this afternoon to see if he needs surgery. And it's honestly, it just feels like it's always something, and I'm sure you can relate to that. It's just, one thing after the other, you just feel like, is everything ever going to just work out? And, maybe not. I don't know. I'm still on the path of figuring that out, but I know that when I come to God and when I trust Him is when I feel the most peace and when I feel closest to God. So that's what it took to get me there. I wouldn't trade it for the world. So I guess I share all that with you just so you can know that even though I'm a professional person that works with development, I still know what it's like as a mom to just have these overwhelming fears at times that just seem unbearable. So I'm going to talk a bit about development year by year from 0 to 5, since I know everyone in this room has at least one 0 to 5-year-old. And I really think the way that God created us is amazing. And so as an occupational therapist and as I work with development, I really get to see just the beauty of how our bodies work and what God intended when He was creating people. So first of all, the first thing I think it's helpful to know is with development, we as people develop from our core, so that's our abdominals and our back muscles, out to our tips. So we really need those core muscles to be developed before we can do anything with our hands. Also, males and females, if you have both genders in your home, you know this, they tend to develop differently. So, males tend to, but not always, have more gross motor skills and more skill with the movements. And then females tend to develop their language skills earlier and their articulation skills earlier, which is how they sound when they speak. Of course, that's not always true, but typically it is. And then I mentioned a little bit about gross motor skills. That's just basically the big motor movements, the running, the jumping. And then fine motor skills is, in addition to hands and the small muscles, we also focus on eyes, so eye-hand coordination. If there's a child with a visual difficulty, they often will have a fine motor delay. And fine motor actually does also include the small muscles of the mouth, which is more speech therapy. Sometimes those people do that too, but that's kind of the general definition of those two things. So from 0 to 1, your perfect little life record. What we want to see for gross motor is, and this is the age where I feel like most of us get we just have a lot of awareness of, those check boxes of what's supposed to be happening. But we want to see kids going from holding their head up, rolling, sitting, crawling and standing. I know that a lot of us feel the pressure to have our 1-year-olds the day they turn 1 walking. That's not necessarily typically what we expect professionally. Like in occupational therapy, we expect them to be doing that by 15 to 18 months. So I didn't include that on this 0 to 1 stage. And then for fine motor skills, the first thing we want to see is the eyes developing so that they're tracking objects left to right, up and down with their vision, and then eventually reaching for objects and, passing things between hands, using their hands together, the waving and the cute little Cheerio pickup with these 2 fingers eventually. The first year, what's most important for social emotional skills is really bonding with your parent, the caregiver, and the social smile, seeing that separation anxiety, which doesn't feel good, but actually is a good thing. It suggests that your child is bonded well with you, and then peek at things like that. So for me, this 0 to 1 year with my twin boys was quite the journey. So these are a few of their pictures. Okay, so let's start at the top there. I have Zach in the blue and Asher in the green, these little 4-month-olds there. They had a condition called torticollis, which is pretty common. And it sounds horrible. I don't know why we do that. And in medicine, we tend to give these horrible sounding names. But torticollis basically just means that the muscles on one side of the neck, for them it was the left side of their neck, is they're tightened. So you're kind of experiencing life like this or like this, depending, which of course is going to impact your motor skills, and it's going to impact your sense of self, how you kind of fit in the world if you're that infant, how you, your balance eventually. So it does have a lot of impacts, torticollis. It also can impact how your head shape is developing. So my twins ended up in helmets, and as an OT, I keep doing that, as an OT for me, I was like, these are things I know, I can't believe I can't prevent this, but it is not about me. Of course I couldn't prevent it. This is like, how God made them and what was happening. But they ended up in helmets, which I think are adorable, and actually prevented a lot of accidents. We had, as soon as we got them taken off, they were rolling around the house and running their heads into things. So it was cute. I think actually at the nursery, when I would drop them off in the helmets, the people would be like, that is one overprotective mom there. And then this is all within the first year. Then right after that, they started having eye crossing issues. So we ended up with the patching and the vision surgery. And you guys, it keeps going. They had penis surgery. I mean, they had so many surgery. I thought that boys just peed everywhere. I had no idea. Turns out their little penises were working well. I've just said penis like 6 times. and then I mentioned the audiology, and they both have had multiple therapies. And I mean, I'm just like, what the heck? I thought they were healthy kids. I don't know. God's using it in my life, though, I can tell you that, to just bring me closer to Him and to trust Him with the junk that comes up in life. So I wouldn't change a minute of it, honestly. I could cry thinking about that, but they're a delight when they're not, hitting each other. Okay, so that's Asher and Zach for you. So 1 to 2 years, it's all about me year. My daughter's favorite word is mine, and she just started saying, oh, mine. Of course, that's what you're going to do. So there's some really interesting things that happened this year, and what I think is fascinating about how God made us are these tools on the ends of our arms here, these hands. We really see them developing in this 1st to 2nd year. So if you look at your own hands, we have obviously 5 fingers, and these first 3 fingers, thumb, index, and middle finger, are the part of the hand that does all the work. So in that first year, we see our hand begin to kind of specialize and separate. So these fingers start to do things like, pick up a fork, pick up a spoon, try and manipulate objects, start coloring with a crayon. And then the other 2 fingers are more the stabilizing side. So the index and the pinky, they kind of just help with what the other side is doing. So we really want to see that happening in the first year. That's sort of, this picture here is sort of just a basis of what happens with how we hold a pencil, which I also think is amazing. Of course, I work with hands, so I'm interested in this, but at first we see that they're using their whole hand, and then eventually, hopefully, most of the people in this room use these 3 fingers. If you use 4 fingers to hold your pencil still, then I'm sure you have pain with you, right? So that first year we want to see gross motor-wise, so the big motor movements, that's when we want to see walking, running, eventually doing stairs independently. My kids could not do that because of their vision issue. My boys couldn't, they still don't have depth perception actually, so stairs is still kind of a big deal for them. And then we want to see throwing a ball, kicking, jumping, things like that. Fine motor is when we, of course, want to start to see them scribbling, turning pages, blocks, and then social emotional this year is when they start to notice peers, give hugs and kisses, do all those sweet things. So that's 1 to 2. If you have any questions, if I'm going too fast, if something doesn't make sense, please feel free to write it down and I can try and address it later. Great. So 2 to 3 years. I worked with, yes, you must have 2 to 3 year-olds, right? Yeah. So I worked with a speech therapist that used to say, oh yeah, 2 to 3 years, where they say, I want the red cup, the red cup, the red cup! You know, they just are so adamant and so rigid at this stage about getting what they want. So for gross motor at this stage of development, we want to see kids starting to tiptoe, catching large balls, starting to ride a trike. Don't freak out if your 2-year-old is not riding a trike, but starting to do that. And then having enough balance to stand on one foot. Fine motor-wise, we can see that they're starting to dress themselves with help, but really they get undressed a lot, which can lead to a lot of naked children. You know, I've walked in the morning and seen my children all naked, and I'm like, oh, it must be cold all night. Now, snipping with scissors is actually, as an occupational therapist, something that we want to see that a 2 to 3-year-old can do, but I don't know, do that at your own risk, right? Because you're going to end up with some haircuts if you try that. Social emotional, so this is between 2 and 3 years, we see a lot of parallel play, so that's when kids are standing next to each other, doing the same thing, but not really doing anything reciprocal. They're just kind of both playing with cars, both playing with baby dolls, that kind of thing. Okay. So 3 to 4 years. This is when kids do things that just defy belief, defy expectation. That's not my child. I'm sure my kids have done that at this point, but that's just someone that I thought to describe this year. So for 3 to 4 years, what we really want to see developing for gross motor skills are kind of just more of what I have been talking about, just further down the line. So instead of just bouncing on one foot, now I want them to hop on one foot, riding a trike well, going on a slide, climbing and getting into things. So for fine motor skills this year, we really want to make sure that child has a hand preference. So that means they prefer one hand over the other. I've worked with a lot of families that will come in and say, my kid he doesn't have a hand preference, but I just think he might be ambidextrous. And certainly there is a percentage of the population that has that ability to use both hands well, but what we really want to see is that they actually do prefer to use one over the other. There's got to be, I never see them in therapy because they never have the need for people that truly are ambidextrous, but that really is defined as using both hands well. So I would recommend trying to figure out which one is working better for your child, which hand. And then social emotional, this year we want to see some turn taking and some sharing really being commonplace. Yeah, I know, right? Sharing doesn't always happen, right? Okay, so that's 3 to 4 years. Here we go, 4 to 5 years. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. And I say that because this is the year where we can see that kids they just have more independence and more ability to kind of, play independently, and you can trust them for short periods of time to do things on their own without unwrapping all the toilet paper or, destroying the closet or throwing 250 books down the stairs, which my kids did one day. So gross motor-wise, this year we want to see the somersaulting, potentially skipping, humping on a swing independently, climbing a ladder, hopefully with you there next to them. We also want to see with the dressing that they can do buttons and zippers. Some kids can even start to tie shoes closer to 5 to 6 years. Drawing pictures. Eventually, and this is a big one, especially in Michigan, before kids start kindergarten, there's an expectation that they can write their name. So again, for that to happen, it's good to have a hand preference established the year before, so they've had more practice with using one hand over the other to do things like writing and drawing. And then for social emotional skills, this is where kids can have such a strong imagination that they might actually think that they're Elsa, or they might actually think that they're Batman. And we also see a lot of role playing, so that house comes into playing house, comes into the picture, and then cooperative play with peers. So this is the year that we see more of that back and forth play. Okay, so I kind of breezed over all that, but I thought it was important to share all that with you, but I don't think that if your kid is not checking off anything in one of those boxes, that is any reason to panic. There is so much out there to help you and your child, get from point A to point B. And obviously, as a therapist, I love working with kids, and people in the helping industry want to help your child. And for me, as I have had my own children in therapy and my own children in the hands of someone else, it's been a joy for me to watch the relationship and watch another person love my child. So please don't panic if you feel like, why isn't my kid doing that already? Okay, so when I was asked to give this talk, what I really was excited about was to share with you some of the parenting takeaways that I use every day. And sometimes I'll be, doing something that I use a lot in therapy, and I would think, gosh, I wish I had a format for sharing this with other moms, because there's, it's not like we necessarily have all the skills that, we could ever need. So this is the perfect format for that. So thank you for letting me share these. The first thing that I think can be a real game changer is positive reinforcement. So that's, a fairly clinical sounding term, but basically that is catching your child doing things well. So it's very easy, and of course I do this all the time too. I'm, speaking to myself when I'm giving these tips, but it's very easy to notice when your kid is, oh, Zach, don't hit your sister. Yeah, sure, I told you 3 times to go put your plate in the sink. Stop screaming, stop yelling. We notice when our kids do things wrong, and we give them a lot of correction for that. But if we can sort of reverse that and make sure that we're also noticing when they're doing things well, that's going to promote them doing things well more. Just the other day, Asher gave Chloe, his younger sister, his first spontaneous hug, which was kind of a big deal in our house. So I gave him a lot of praise for that, because I want to see him, giving her more hugs. And actually, I have a pretty close friends who they have a son that, just by nature, he really needs a lot of attention. And he was getting a lot of attention because he was honestly crazy. He would just walk out of the house at 2 years old and, go find neighbors to play with at 3 years old, without telling his parents. He's just a pretty adventurous kid. And so he was getting a lot of negative attention for all the things that he was, getting, all the mischief he was creating, all the things he was getting into. So what the family had to do, and this isn't for everyone, but they had to just totally ignore the negative behaviors and only give him feedback when he made positive choices, give him a lot of praise for that. And what they discovered through that process was that he really just needs attention. He was just seeking attention any way he could get it, he was going to do it. So if they were only going to give him negative attention, he was only going to do things that got him that negative attention. So that's really the one thing that if I can share with you, I'd want you to take away. The next thing is the countdown. I do this a lot in therapy. Some kids really, you can tell them 6 times, John, get your backpack, go get your backpack, please go get your backpack. But if you give them a specific goal of how fast you want them to do it, you have 5 seconds to get your backpack, or I'm going to have to help you, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That can, make things happen a lot quicker, which I know we all appreciate if things would actually get done when we ask the first time. And for some kids, it could even just be, a 20-second countdown. I had a kid that I worked with that was on the autism spectrum that was the sweetest boy, but he had no awareness of time. He was about 8 at this time. He really could not tell the difference between a second and a minute. He just did not understand. So, whenever he would go to the bathroom for, half of my session, I'd be like, oh gosh, we're wasting my whole hour here with him in the bathroom. So eventually, I told him, he actually had a timer. He would take it in there with him, and he would watch it drop down to 0. So just helping kids with, I hope that didn't lead to any accidents. I don't think it did, but helping kids with sort of managing and understanding the time restraints that you want them to complete things in. So next is distraction, which can be very helpful for toddlers more so. Maybe husbands too, actually. Get them distracted on something. So this, I had a 2-year-old that I was working with that had a stroke in utero, and he had his right hand, or I don't remember if it was right or his left. One of his hands was always fisted, and as you can imagine, if you spent 2 years with your hand, closed up like this, when I was trying to stretch it and really get those muscles to open up, he hated it, and he would see me coming and just scream, and it was heartbreaking for me, and even more so for the mom, because she wanted him to get help, but she also did not want to hear her child scream, understandably. So the only thing that would work with this kid was making crazy sounds. So I would bring him back, he would obviously have a fit, but just distracting him with noises while I moved his hand was, really the only way that I could get him to kind of calm down. And I do this often, and this does not always work, but with my child, my 20-month-old, if she's freaking out about not wearing this morning, for example, she wanted to wear her size 6-month Christmas pajamas for the day, which I have no idea how I created these children that at 20 months have preferences on their clothes, but they do. So instead of, I took her away from the pajamas, took her out of the room, and just started singing and talking about who was coming to babysit today, to just distract her from whatever was going on in her little mind about these silly pajamas. The next thing is first then language. So this is helpful when your child is adamant about doing something that you're okay with, but you want them to do something else first. So I really want to eat this brownie, Mom, let me eat this brownie. Well, first 3 green beans, then you can eat your brownie. First, I need you to put away your toys, then you can watch your TV show. So giving them an idea of the sequence of how you need things to happen. And it also lets them know that they're going to get what they want, but first they need to do what you need them to do. Okay, so identify what is sucking the life out of you. So therapy, we have a parent interview initially where we bring a family in and we just talk about, what are some of the challenges with your child? What are some things that aren't going well that you would like to see being different? And just, so sometimes we'll have families that, their child has a lot of needs and, they'll often say, everything's going wrong. Or right now I work in the schools with teachers mostly, and parents also, but a lot of teachers will know, everything is hard with this child, there's nothing that's going well. So it's really, first of all, that's not accurate. There's things that your child is doing well, and there's, especially for the teacher in the school, which I have a lot of respect for. There usually are some strengths that the child has. It's just hard to see that when the relationship is broken down. But it's important to just very specifically think about what is difficult so we can make progress from there. For example, this year my boys are in kindergarten for the first time, and hopefully for the last time. So we have this morning routine, and I'm trying to get out the door. My husband's already gone. I need to get to work. My daughter needs to get to daycare. And for 6 months in Michigan, they have to wear snow pants and boots and hats and mittens and blah. So we're trying to get out the door, and it's horrible. The bus comes at 8:40. Supposedly it's always late, but I still have to be out there on time. And I just was dreading mornings, and I would just get stressed out. And I was complaining about it to my husband one day, and I was like, wait a second, it's not the whole morning that's horrible. It's really just those 10 minutes before the bus comes where I'm yelling, no one's listening to me, So it's funny how often we'll just, have a general sense that everything is horrible. And if we can really, think about it more concretely and take time to do that, it's really just one specific thing that might be fixable. For me, I just, instead of 10 minutes of getting everyone's stuff together, I gave us 15. And that really just solved the problem there. And let's see, these last two things. Okay, I kind of talked a bit about the last one, but following through on threats and making good consequences. So I know we have all been there when we've been at Meijer or Target with our kid, and if you don't get over here right now, I'm going to leave. But the truth is that you're not going to leave your child there. That sort of undermines our credibility. So when we can make good threats and say things that we're actually going to follow through on, that is always more helpful. And then so I kind of talked about being honest and accurate in describing the problem. I do this with of my twins, one of my sons has a little more difficulty, and some days I'll just, at the end of the day, I'll just be like, gosh, everything is hard with this kid, just like that teacher I mentioned earlier that was doing that. And I'll realize, everything's not actually hard with him. There's certain things that we're working on, but it's helpful if we can just be honest and accurate when we are describing problems. Okay, so just some final thoughts before we get to the Q&A. I think it really is helpful to remember that, all kids will benefit from help that their mom cannot provide for them at some point in their life. It might be therapy early on. With me, it's been a lot of therapy with my boys. It could be that your teenage daughter will need help from a school counselor. There's just, or any kind of medical professional. There's a myriad of things that happen in development that will require help from someone else. And I just kind of want to take away some of the shame that people might feel from, admitting that your child isn't developing like you think they should be, or things aren't going like they could be. And the last thing, and I know that this is part of a fierce flourishing, is finding the good. So I wanted to share some of my favorite verses about this, and it's Romans 8:28, and it says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." So I know from my own perspective that when I can find the good in my children, just regardless of how they're stacking up developmentally, I'm so much more grateful. I'm more able to choose joy. And that eventually draws me closer to God, which is, for me, it's what my whole purpose in life is. And one final verse that I want to share with you before we get to the Q&A is Romans 8, another one from Romans 8, 38 and 39. And these have always been my favorite verses, so I just wanted to have a second to share them. But I'm convinced that neither life nor death, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come can separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. And if that's true, then we are blessed, right? So that wraps up my presentation, but how did you want to do this, Nancy?
You guys are ready.
They're coming already with they're like finding me. Here's my question.
Oh, okay, great.
No, but so I think what we'll do is give you just a minute to wrap up. If you haven't had a question down yet and you want to get one down, go ahead and do that. And then we'll come and collect them. And while we're doing that, why don't you discuss at your tables, if you did have these preconceived, if you felt a little bit like the couple on the video, and then what happened when reality hit your home. Did it look the same? Did it look different? Spend some time chatting about that.